Morning, Laura. Good morning, everybody. Before I begin, I'd like to give a shout out to a number of members of the CST team who are on today. Yvonne Lima, our ops manager, Yvonne Jimenez, our admin manager. From our marketing team, Grecia and Marta, and ops, back at the ops center, we have Majo and Adri listening in. So I want to give a shout out to everybody. They are members of the team, and thanks to the CST team, we can make these presentations happen and be able to share this information. I'm going to go ahead and share the screen. Please let me know if I have been successful.
I will do that, Rick. And you are successful. And would you like to do our poll questions before you get started?
Yeah, let's go ahead and do those first, please.
So our first poll question is, what type of pilot are you? I'm a professional pilot. I'm an owner. I'm a renter or club pilot, or I am a professional pilot along with one of the other choices. So this will just give us all a good idea of who's here today and what kind of flying we all do. And I am going to end this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's our results. 9% of us are professional pilots, 52% of us are owners, 27% are renters or club pilots, and 12% are professional pilots along with one of the other choices. And then our second question, what age bracket are you in? Less than 30, 30 to 40, 40 to 50, or better than 50? And I will end that poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's our results. We have no one less than 30 this morning. 5% 30 to 40, 10% 40 to 50, and 85% of us are better than 50. And yeah, that's me. All right. Next question. What is the primary social media platform that you use? Facebook, Instagram, X, formerly Twitter, LinkedIn, or I don't use social media. And we will let this one run for a sec. And while this is running, Rick, last week there was someone who was wondering if you were going to start using the social media platform Blue Sky.
I would have to defer to my marketing team, but I have not heard that mentioned. But as I'll state at the end of the presentation, we do upload a lot of short videos on different international flying topics. So, take advantage of them. They're out there. They're free.
Yeah, there's some great ones on YouTube. I know I used one of your shorts this morning. They're really good. All right, I'm going to share these results. And we have 34% Facebook, 6% Instagram, 7% X, 10% LinkedIn, and 43% don't use social media. And let's go back to our questions. We've got 2 more to go. Of the following options, which one do you use to keep updated on GA topics? And choose the one you use the most. Webinars, official web pages, forums, magazines, or trade shows? We'll let those answers come rolling in. And I will end this poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's our results. 62% of us watch webinars, 9% of us use official web pages, 10% visit forums, 19% read magazines, and 1% of us use trade shows as our major way to update on topics. And then here's our final question. What is your main motivation for flying to Mexico? Job, vacation, or both? And we'll end this one, and I can tell how this one's going to turn out, in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And here's our results. 6% for work, 86% of us for a vacation, and 8% for both. And it's back to you, Rick.
All right. Well, very good. Thanks for the feedback. That helps us identify the audience as we do the presentation and the things that I might want to focus in on. A little bit about us. We provide services to both owner pilots and professional pilots. Our customers fly anything from a Cessna 182 up to Boeing 747s, although typically the aircraft at the bottom of the page, that's what our customers are flying. And so we have a wide range of services to meet the needs and the budgets of the operator. And the point here is we don't do like 2 or 3 trips a year to a country. This is what we do all day, every day. We have a wide network of collaborators and partners in all these different airports and all these different countries. And that allows us to stay on top. We also, our admin department, we collect the AIPs, the Aeronautical Information Publications of all of the countries where we operate. And we have those in-house to stay on top of the regulations and such. So either through the formal channels to the AIP or just because every day we're sending aircraft to all these different places, we're constantly getting feedback as to any changes that are taking place. We also collaborate with a number of different associations, AOPA, NBAA. We participate with the Bahamas government. We collaborate with CBP. We meet regularly to review general aviation topics. We provide services to a number of pilot type certificate or type associations, flightplan.com, Ops Group, and of course, we collaborate with the FAA safety team. So we try to share the knowledge, share the information, get the word out to pilots so that everybody can have a good trip. Because when, unfortunately, we get those phone calls from people that say, hey, I heard about you guys, I'm in trouble. And when we ask, okay, why did you do that? It usually revolves about bad planning or no planning. And people think, well, as long as I have to comply with US regs, I'm okay. Well, actually, our own US regs say, no, we have to comply with the regs of the foreign countries that we're going to operate over or in. So how do you do that? Well, attending one of these webinars is a good place to start. So today, what I would like to cover are these different topics. There's a lot of information here, so I'm going to start to pick up the pace and hopefully share with you the very latest of what's going on down here in Mexico. Our operations center is actually in Puebla, Mexico. I'm dialing in today from Puebla, Mexico, so this is something that's near and dear to our hearts. Okay, documents and equipment. First thing you need, a passport. And it should have an expiration date at least 6 months beyond the date of entry into Mexico or whatever foreign country you're going into. And please, please, please do not try to travel with one of these. They're good for crossing into Mexico by ground or by sea, not by air. And occasionally we run into passengers that try to use one of these. That's a big no-no. If any of the people on the aircraft are from another country other than the US or Canada, just make sure they're not going to need a visa to get into Mexico. Okay, sometimes we overlook that. If any of your passengers or crew are from a visa waiver program country and you don't have a visa, you're using ESTA, you cannot enter the United States on a private aircraft unless you are a signatory carrier with CBP. There are some nuances where if you had entered under ESTA, you could, but do your homework before you leave the US with one of those folks on board. We've seen that go south as well. If you're going to have a minor on board the aircraft and either one or both of the parents are not accompanying the minor, you should prepare a notarized letter authorizing that minor to travel to the foreign country with either one of the parents or a guardian, and it should be from the non-traveling parent or parents giving that authorization. If you've been through South America, you may be asked to present a yellow fever vaccination if you went to a country that's at risk for yellow fever. And pets. Mexico has a pretty straightforward process for pets, But on August 1st of this year, the CDC, the Centers for Disease Control, implemented some very strict, very tight regulations for bringing a dog into the US. So if you're going to take a pet, most especially if it's a dog, don't forget to not only check on the Mexican side, but on the US side, because they consider your dog's point of origin the country you departed from, not the fact that you brought it originally from the US. No, wherever that last flight into the US and any other flight before it, wherever that aircraft and that dog went, that is the point of origin. Hopefully you'll never need to use it, but another thing you may want to check before you go is, does your medical insurance cover you in Mexico or wherever you're going? Hopefully you don't need to use it, but it's good to know. If you plan to take anything of great value, jewelry, expensive watches, photography equipment, anything that CBP on your return to the United States could say, did you buy that at a duty free or something? Well, this is a way of proving that those items originated in the United States and they're not dutiable. Do it before you leave the US. Don't try to do it on the return. Another common question that we get is, do I need to fill out a customs declaration, form 6059B? The answer is, it depends. It's varies from port to port. It can vary from officer to officer at the port. Unfortunately, I cannot give you a single and straight answer to that. You will need to travel out of the US to submit the APIS, the US one. And if you're going to Mexico, you need to submit a Mexican APIS. So you want to make sure you have those taken care of. You're going to need an airman certificate, otherwise known as a pilot license. Needs to be private or better. And you should have on the back an English proficient endorsement. If you just got a new rating and you're traveling under the temporary, it should be accepted as long as you're within the 120 days. What is not accepted, I'm afraid, is the sport pilot. You're going to be required to have a medical certificate. I'm going to talk a little bit about the nuances in Mexico with those when I get into the Mexico section, but you will need a medical certificate because right now we're seeing issues with basic med being accepted at certain airports in Mexico. And again, we'll talk about that some more. Per FCC regulations, we need to have a restricted radio operator permit or better. Somebody in the cockpit needs to have one of those. That's a US reg. If you're flying a Citation 500 series family, the 500, 550, 560, under a single pilot exemption from the FAA, bear in mind that exemption is only valid where the FAA has jurisdiction, and that is not Mexico. That aircraft is type certificated for a minimum of 2 crew, and that's what they're going to be looking for. Type rating for the SIC, again, we run into this, aircraft that require 2 crew. The SIC, if that aircraft requires a type rating, both have to be type rated. Airworthiness certificate, you need a standard one. And one of the other most common questions we get is, experimental is okay? Well, the answer is, it depends. If you look on the back of your airworthiness, it says you've got to obtain permission from the foreign countries. And you must bring that permission on board the aircraft in writing to present to an FAA inspector or an inspector of the foreign country. Please don't try to travel with one of these pink temporary certificates. We run into that from time to time. However, you can travel with the Flywire, which is issued by the FAA in Oklahoma City. If you are in the process of renumbering your aircraft, please, please, please don't bring it to Mexico until the tail number on the aircraft matches the tail number on the registration certificate, the airworthiness certificate, the insurance policy, and the weight and balance. Really, really, and this is an error we see from time to time. It can create all sorts of problems for you in Mexico. Per US regs, we need to have a radio station license for the aircraft. You'll need your AFM and your weight and balance with the correct tail number, because Many airport fees in Mexico and other countries are based on the max takeoff weight. And if they're not familiar with your aircraft, they may ask to see it. If it has a different tail number, the train starts to come off the tracks. To return to the US, we need a CBP user fee decal. You can get that from the DTOPS website. Well, if you're using a border overflight exemption, I'll talk about that in the US section in a moment. Make sure you have it on board. Insurance, you will need insurance that covers your countries of overflight and landing when traveling to Mexico. You'll need valid charts, we'll cover those, and a journey log. And we're starting to see different civil aviation departments asking for this. On occasion, we run into it in Mexico because it's actually part of the Mexican regs, and it's basically a logbook for your aircraft. Here's a tip, you can get it at Aircraft Spruce, but I didn't say that. Okay, another US reg that catches pilots by surprise is we're supposed to carry on board our aircraft a noise certificate. It's 14 CFR 91.73. And there it be. Now, if you're flying a turboprop or larger, usually you're going to find that in the AFM. Smaller aircraft, you're probably not. The good news is the FAA publishes a couple of advisory circulars to allow us to create our own. So 9186 and 361H, those one shows you provides the format, the instructions. The other one has the noise data. If by chance you can't find it in 361H, look up Google EASA noise certificate. They have an Excel spreadsheet with a lot of stuff in it. If you're going to fly RVSM outside the US and you are presently flying RVSM airspace under Part 91 Appendix G Section 9, you must have a letter of authorization from the FAA to fly in RVSM airspace outside the US. So if you're one of those, please, it's a very common cause of penalty cases on international flights on US registered aircraft. If you're going to fly across the Gulf of Mexico, there are RMP-10 routes, the Lima and Mike routes. Make sure you have a letter of authorization if you plan to fly those. People say, well, my equipment, it's not the equipment. It's the equipment, it's the crew, and it's a letter of authorization. So if you're planning to fly one of those, make sure you've got one. If the aircraft is registered in the name of a corporation, we recommend that you get a notarized letter from the officer or owner of the company that owns the aircraft, which in many cases is yourself, authorizing you or whoever to fly that aircraft out of the US and clarify that who is authorized to fly it, the crew, the relationship of the people on board to the owner, and it is a private, non-commercial. Sometimes you can run into the aircraft is registered to Great Aviation LLC. They're going to say, oh, Great Aviation must be a charter. Where's your charter permit? So this is a great thing to have in your back pocket. I would only show it if required. We have you can create your own template, or we have a template on our member website. Make sure you've got the appropriate equipment. Traveling to Mexico, it's pretty straightforward. You will need a Mode C transponder to cross the ATIS. ADS-B in Mexico is 1090 extended squitter. You'll need 12-inch numbers to cross the ATIS. And also make sure your nav database covers Mexico or wherever else you're planning to fly. That's a common error. Mexico requires a 406 megahertz ELT. Don't forget, if you're beyond gliding distance, Mexico requires life raft and life jackets for everyone on board, and you should bring suitable survival equipment. Whatever you may need, don't expect to find it, bring it with you, okay? Chocks, locks, parts, tow bars, whatever, make sure you have it. If you're gonna be flying over the water, a handheld radio is always a great add for your emergency equipment. If you're gonna be flying over the Gulf or along the coast, if you have access to a marine handheld, that's a great add to have. I wouldn't buy one to fly to Mexico, but a sat phone can be a useful thing to have. I also recommend a 406 megahertz PLB. That's another great thing. And a tracking device is also a very useful safety item as well. Aluminum sticks, strobes. If anyone's looking for you at night with night vision goggles, those things can really make you stand out. Now, One thing I want to clarify, the pilot in command is legally responsible for all regs, US, foreign, including making sure everyone on the aircraft with their passports. So if there's going to be a penalty case, it's not going to be against the passenger. It's not going to be against your spouse. Can't blame it on your spouse. And it's not going to be based on the lady back at the office. Person in the left front seat. So make sure you comply and make sure everybody is compliant. If you're going to use a Coast Guard Type 5 vest that with the automatic inflation feature, I urge you to disable that automatic inflation feature, because imagine you're in the cabin of a sinking aircraft and that thing pops open. Now you're stuck to the ceiling or the floor of the cabin underwater. That's really not a good picture. So these things were designed for fishermen when they fall off a boat, not for pilots inside the cabin of an aircraft. Weather-wise, Mexico has very, very large territory. Consequently, the weather varies from barren to very lush tropical. So wherever you're going, do your homework in advance. There's 3 coastlines: Pacific, Gulf, Caribbean. The rainy season is right now, May to October. And terrain, we've got mountains and volcanoes up to 18,000 feet plus. So talk about a lifting action. We can get some really spectacular thunderstorms down here. And be aware that during the hurricane season, you've got to keep an eye out. We've had several hurricanes this season. We've had a couple hit us on the Pacific coast already, as well as on the Caribbean side. So, you know, hopefully when you're planning your trip and executing, the hurricane center map looks like that. We also have a service on our member website. It's an international weather page. That's something that we have put together to help us and our members be able to get weather information. And for those of you that use our premium services, if you haven't used them recently, we are now using WSI for all of our weather for our premium services. Charts. Well, the old sectional charts used to cover parts of Mexico along the border, but no more. The IFR en route chart still does, so that is a useful thing. Mexico did publish on 2 occasions their own WAC charts. They have not published them in a long time. So we do have a digital form on our website, and I know the apps like Garmin Pilot and ForeFlight also have charts. Just make sure you've got valid charts. Mexico has VFR procedure charts and terminal area charts as well. Those are important because a lot of that information is really hard to come by. I'll talk about that a little bit more. Also on our member website, we have the old operational navigation charts for those that might want to use those. We still have those. And of course, SkyVector and others have chart data as well. When planning your route, there's a couple of new airports I want to just point out that you may have heard about. One is Santa Lucia, or it's called Felipe Angeles. It's called the AIFA. Anyway, it's a new airport in the northeast of Mexico City. It is kind of long to get to, and the ground transportation's not the greatest. But you've probably, wondering, is it going to be beneficial? Really depends where you're going in Mexico City. The other one that is popular is Tulum. That part of the Riviera Maya is becoming more and more popular. And so there's now an international airport in Tulum, big runway, towered instrument approaches, and that one is gaining popularity very quickly. So that's a new airport if you're thinking going in that part of Mexico. Mexico charges for their airspace just like the US does and many others. So if you flew through the flight information region, and you did not depart or land in a Mexican airport, then you probably owe. And this catches pilots by surprise sometimes because it runs all the way out to the Havana Fier, all the way down to Cessna. And what has tripped up some pilots, there's an agreement between Mexican ATC and the US. And sometimes Houston Center will actually vector you through Mexican space. You'll never talk to Mexican ATC, but you did go in and they know. And so that has caught some pilots by surprise. And I had no idea I went into Mexican space. Well, you did. So you need to, unfortunately, they don't send invoices. The process is called self-determination. They have to be paid through a Mexican bank by the 17th of the month. And if you don't pay them, two things can happen. Your aircraft can be blocked from airspace if you're trying to fly through it. Or if you fly to Mexico, they'll let you in, but as soon as you landed, the door gets closed and you cannot leave until those fees get paid. So if you have any questions, doubts, send us an email or a message. This was kind of a sticky one. We also have an online app available 24/7 if you did, where you can just go in and pay it yourself with a credit card. Try to pick routes that avoid terrain. Mexico has a lot of mountainous terrain in the center of the country. So that's something that you want to take into consideration. You can fly along the coast of the Gulf Coast. If you're coming from South Florida, some people will cut across. Gulf of Mexico, for those of you that have the performance and the survival equipment. There's a great place if you came on the east side or on the Pacific side and you want to get to the other side, the Ixtepec Pass. This is a great area because the terrain, the terrain is almost at sea level. It's like a valley. It cuts right through the Sierra Madre Mountains. So it's, if you're concerned about terrain and, your performance limited, that's a great thing to use. If you're entering Mexico from any of these places, you must, and I emphasize must, make your first landing in either Tapachula or Cozumel. So if you're coming from the Bahamas, the Caribbean, Central America, South America, you've got to make your landing at one of those two airports, okay? Consider airspace and permit requirements, all right? If you're coming across into Mexico, well, coming from the mainland across the border is not a problem. You're going straight into Mexican airspace. But if you're coming from South Florida, you're going to clip Cuban airspace, and there have been some changes. You do need to get, if you're flying on green, these are the old NDB, the old colored airways, green 765 now requires a permit. So if you're flying IFR on green 765, you will need an overflight permit. If you're VFR, as long as you remain outside of Cuba's inner ATIS, you should be fine. They just want you to enter and exit their FIR, their flight information region, at a fix, okay, at a waypoint, not at an arbitrary point. If you need a Cuban overflight permit, again, we have an app for that. They're available. It's available 24/7, and just put in your itinerary and a credit card, and we can get you a permit. Whenever entering or leaving Mexico, you must make your first landing and your last takeoff from an airport of entry. And if you're entering from other than the US, bottom line, Cozumel or Tapachula. If you're thinking you just said that, you're right, I did. And this won't be the last time I say it, because I'm trying to make sure nobody runs afoul of that reg. Always check availability of fuel, plan on an alternate. Fuel in Mexico is measured in liters, so make sure you know how to convert to gallon. If you need any additives, make sure you bring it with you because they can be hard to find and expensive. 100 LL is called gas avion, which is literally a Spanish translation of avgas. But Jet A is referred to down here as turbocina. Prices, we have those on our member website, and we update those twice a month. We have a feed with the Mexican government and the different fuel agencies in Mexico, and we get those and put them up there. Route planning tips. Always plan on an alternate no matter what the reg. Keep in mind when you plan an alternate, if you needed an AOE, make sure the airport that you pick as an alternate is an AOE. If you're going to need fuel when you land, make sure the alternate has fuel. Check for any seasonal events, like the Baja races and, spring break, the Cancun area, things like that. That can affect parking and congestion at airport. So you check any restrictions on those. If you're crossing the Gulf IFR, make sure you understand that those Lima and Mike routes are RNP-10. However, there are two amber routes that still cross the Gulf. So you don't have one, you can still use the amber route. So if you're not, if you're going to cross the Gulf of Mexico in a jet or a turboprop and you have any doubts, check before you go, give us a call. Okay, now what I'm going to do is jump into the US procedures. And these are specific to places south of the United States. And without getting into the legal specification, which is in 19 CFR 122.23, it's basically if you're coming to the US from anywhere in the Western hemisphere other than Canada or Bermuda, you're south, okay? And if you are, that is the procedure we're going to cover today. So those procedures revolve around two general concepts, CBP and NORAD. So let's cover departures first. We're going to depart the US. As far as CBP is concerned, you could leave from any airport, unless they tell you otherwise, which is exceedingly rare. You can leave from the grass strip behind your house if you have one. If you're going to take the expensive stuff, don't forget, before you go, get that 4457 approved. And you will have to submit a US APIS manifest no later than 1 hour before your departure. And if you don't know what EAPIS is, this is something you really need to become very well versed in before you go to Canada, to the Bahamas, anywhere, okay, in a private aircraft. This is something you want to do some research on. When you submit APIS, you're going to get a departure clearance email. And it looks something like this. Now, those that have been doing this for a while, say, oh, yeah, it's the same email since 2000 and the start 2008. It's not. It looks like it, but the text has changed. And it's different for the departures versus the arrival. So I urge you, if you haven't read this in a while, read it, because there are very specific instructions in there that if you don't follow them, they could get you into a little bit of trouble or a lot of trouble. To leave the US, we have to cross the Air Defense Identification Zone. It's basically the US-Mexico border, and then airspace is off the coast. If you're leaving from Florida, it sits literally right off the Florida coastline. It's right there. And there are two parts, 14 CFR, parts 45 and 99, address the requirements. If you don't know what those parts say, you are not alone. I didn't either till I got into this. And basically what it boils down to are four things. One, you got to be on an active flight plan. You have to be squawking a discrete transponder code in mode C. You must have a two-way radio, and you've got to be talking or at least monitoring ATC before crossing or entering the ATIS. And you need to have 12-inch registration numbers. That's really the bottom line. Now, we do collaborate with Flight Service, and the folks at Flight Service have asked us repeatedly to share pilots that flight following alone does not satisfy these requirements. You've got to file a flight plan. You have to activate the flight plan. And if it's VFR, it's a DVFR flight plan. You do that with Flight Service. If it's IFR, it's like any other IFR flight plan. All right. So before departing the US, we must file a flight plan. I said IFR. Whatever method you use today, if you file it through flightplan.com, Garmin Pilot, ForeFlight, whatever, that's what you do. Okay? If you're going to fly VFR, you need to file a DVFR flight plan with Flight Service, okay? And it needs to be activated. Again, Leidos Flight Service has asked us, please, please, please emphasize that. This gets some pilots into trouble. And then I'll get pilots, oh, I've been doing this for, 500 years and I've never done it. True. It's like not paying taxes. You can get away with it until you don't. You need to activate before you go. A lot of our CEOs, remote communications outlets in Florida and US-Mexico border that you can do that with. And don't forget to close your flight plan. Now, here's a nuance. When you are crossing into Mexico at the US-Mexico border, what Flight Service would like for us to do is to, once you reach the border, let them know. And they emphasize, if you were doing flight following, that's a great idea. I'm not against flight following, quite the contrary. I'm a big advocate if you're VFR. But what they say is, if you cancel flight following, that did not close your flight plan. So they would really like for you to let them know you have arrived. When returning to the US from places south, before leaving the foreign country, make sure that decal that I mentioned at the beginning, you must have one of these. Now, technically, you could do it when you land, but you're going to be incredibly unpopular with CBP, and there's this cause and effect relationship. If you make their life miserable, well, you know what the rest is. You may have to do one of those customs declarations. As I said at the beginning, it depends on a number of factors. It's not haphazard. There is a logic to it. but just know that you may be asked. Now, you must, when arriving from places south, you must make your first landing at one of 32 designated airports that are in 19 CFR 122.24. And you need to land at the designated airport that is closest to your point of border or coastline crossing, unless you have a border overflight exemption, okay, that you can request from U.S. Customs and Border Protection. There are the designated airports. They all sit along the U.S.-Mexico border, South Florida, with the exception of Wilmington, North Carolina. That's for the heavy iron guys coming up from the Caribbean, headed up to the Northeast. But for most everyone else, they sit down here, okay? And what we can't do is overfly one while en route to another. But as in everything in life, there are exceptions. And these 4 airports here, the only way to get to them is by overflying a designated airport. Why is that? Well, I'm just the messenger. You to ask somebody in our federal government why that is, but it just is. As long as they grant you permission to land at those 4, yes, you can overfly another airport. Now, the Miami field office did one better. They say, as long you can overfly any one of their 8 designated airports while en route to another one of their designated airports, and they'll call that the close one. That actually makes a lot of sense. Why? If you're coming back to Florida from Mexico, from the Yucatan Peninsula, everyone would have to land in Key West. And if you've ever been to Key West, you will quickly understand that that's not a great thing. So this allows them to spread the traffic out over more of their airports. It's good for them, and it's also good for us. And Marathon is now functioning as a designated airport. Technically, it's not one, it's not in the reg, but it's working like one. So you may want to take advantage of that. You need to talk to CBP there to get permission to land, but you can use it as well. You can request a border overflight exemption so that you can go to any CBP airport. If you're flying an aircraft with a lot of, with performance and range, you can request one. They take 30 days. By regulation, it's 30 days. And the important thing is if you have one, the operator, they issue the BOE to the operator, an operator. Whatever you put in your APIS manifest needs to match. Okay, you got to make sure that the operator you put in the manifest is the operator to whom the BOE was issued. The BOE has instructions. You need to bring the original, print a copy, bring it with you, and it's got instructions on it of what you need to do to use it. Before you leave the foreign country back to the US, you need to submit, again, an APIS manifest no later than 1 hour before departure. And you must also, as with the departure, you must get one of these clearance emails. If you don't get one, you are not cleared, okay? And again, you want to read this email because it's got very specific steps and instructions of what we are required to do to return to the US. So be sure you have read and complied. If you're using that BOE, remember the operator on the manifest must match what's on the BOE, and you must obtain permission to land from CBP at the intended airport of landing. You haven't flown international in a while, but you had in the past. I know pilots would say, oh, I used to fly into San Diego, and they'd tell me, don't even bother calling, just come in, or I would fly into Fort P. Yeah, I know. But today, that is not the case. They've really, really hammered down on this. It is a regulatory requirement. We must call and get secure permission to land. So please, 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 regardless of what a particular airport or officer that you know did in the past, we must secure permission to land today, okay? Whenever talking to CBP, get their name. There's no regulatory restriction why they can't give it to you, but sometimes they'll only give initials, whatever, but just try to record who you talked to and what you talked about. Once permission to land is granted, you should get an email from CBP that looks something like this. And this, I think, is a great thing because now we actually have a written confirmation from CBP that we were authorized we were granted permission to land. So if you fly in and there's an officer with his hands on his hips or her hips, and they say, you didn't call us, we didn't know you were coming, you can say, oh, yes, I did. Here, I've got this email. This is what I've got. What do you have? And, This is from CBP, so you're in a good place. Along with that email, you're going to get a number of attachments. One very important one is the fact sheet. This has very specific information on this airport that you're planning to operate, contact information, procedures. These are great. You can get a fact sheet on that email, but if you want to get one in advance, CBP is in the process of uploading them to the cbp.gov website. If you're a CST member, we're on the distribution list. We have all of them on our member website. Just click on the state and pick the one that before you leave the foreign country, you will need to file an ICAO flight plan with the local civil aviation. If you're flying VFR, contact flight service in the US because sometimes VFR flight plan information doesn't get to them, okay? And this is a good way of ensuring that they can record your information in their system, so if they don't get your information from the foreign ATC, in this case Mexico, they will already have your information in their system. Before you cross the ATIS, I have to emphasize again, active flight plan, squawking a discrete transponder code issued by flight service or ATC, and talking, okay? Beware codes issued by foreign ATC. So let's say, for example, you are VFR, you're coming up the Gulf Coast and you fly through Tampico, and the controller, the approach controller there, because they now have radar, is going to issue you a squawk code so they can radar identify you as you transition through. Do what you're told to do. But once they say if they say radar services terminated squawk VFR, go back to the code that flight service gave you. Don't cross the ATIS unless you want to have your very own personal military air show and you at center stage. Don't cross the ATIS or enter the ATIS squawking 1200. All right. When you land, go to wherever CBP told you. Wait for the officer to come. If you have an APU, the exhaust is over 8 feet high, you can leave it running. Otherwise, you are required to shut it down, and you need to present whatever documents CBP asks for. If you were VFR, don't forget to close your plan. If you substitute people on manifest, you've got to file a new APIS. If you change the date of your flight, you've got to file an APIS manifest. And again, permission to land must be obtained directly from CBP at the port of arrival. Whatever instructions are in the emails or the officer tells you, that is what we must follow. And if you have to resubmit APIS for whatever reason, change of date, you adding another person, substituting a person, whatever email authorization you had received, you've got to get a new one. And whatever permission to land was granted, had been granted to the old manifest, you now have to re-secure permission to land, okay? And if you cancel your flight, you should cancel. And you'll get a cancellation email that looks like this. And if for whatever reason you're ever denied, you'll get a denial email that looks something like that. Okay. Other observations, you should never be asked to give personally identifiable information via fax. You shouldn't be asked to send it through fax, through email, or any unsecured. If that ever happens, ask to speak to a supervisor. That's a big no-no for CBP and for us as well. Always check that the port is going to be open on the date and time you want to fly while you're doing your flight planning process. And one of the other questions is, can I open the door? There's no regulatory restriction why you can't, okay? You can open the door, just you are expected to stay right with the aircraft. Don't go to the bathroom, don't go into the FBO. You see a friend across the way on the ramp, don't go over and talk to them. You and the baggage, everything that was on that aircraft, you're expected to stay in the immediate vicinity of the aircraft. If you're transporting more than 10,000, it's not illegal to transport more than 10,000. It's illegal not to report it. So make sure if you're going to do that. We've seen a lot of money and a lot of gold and silver get confiscated. So don't go there. Okay, other tips, IFR will help comply immediately with the ATIS crossing. If that's something you're a little apprehensive, just go IFR. By default, you've complied. Check NOTAMs for TFRs. VFR flight plans are only processed by flight service. IFR is done by ATC. So approach, center, tower cannot see a VFR flight plan. And, that's something you need to bear in mind. Okay, now let's jump to Mexico and cover Mexico procedures, the very latest. So there's been a lot of changes down here. The last government disbanded the federal police, replaced it by the National Guard that now reports into the military. Customs was disbanded, and the new customs, the ANAM, is now run and is part of by the military. Immigration, leadership positions, they're run by military. Civil Aviation Authority, still civil by its name, but it's pretty much run by the military. Many Mexican airports are now operated by military. Aviation fuel at some airports is being sold by the military. And we now have a new president that started October 1st of this year, and we don't see any change to any of this. We don't anticipate any changes or any significant changes to any of this. So with so many new people in so many agencies that interact with civil aviation, there's going to be inefficiencies, stumbling, people learning, on the job. So expect a lot of variations from the past and expect variations from airport to airport. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So as far as experimental aircraft, we were able to secure 2 times an approval from the Civil Aviation Authority. But now it's a moving target. And I would urge, if you're planning to fly to Mexico with an experimental aircraft, contact the Civil Aviation Authority at the airport and airports you plan to operate. Make sure you send them a copy of your airworthiness and that they're going to respect it. There is an advisory circular that, or there was an authorization that was granted, but that whole thing has kind of taken on a life of its own. Then it became aircraft specific authorizations. It's a little bit confusing. So my word of caution is check before the wheels touch the ground in Mexico. The same holds true with basic med. There is an advisory circular authorizing basic med from the FAA, but we've seen at some airports where that basic med is being rejected. Okay, so again, if you're going to fly to Mexico using basic med, check that they're going to authorize your entry using basic med. Otherwise, they're going to be looking for a medical certificate. And some airports are expecting the class of the medical to match. So if you have a ATP, they're going to expect you to have a first class, even though you're exercising third class privileges. So again, check before you go. And it's just right now, it's a little bit confusing because so many people are coming from the military. They have no civil aviation background, and they're kind of building the airplane in flight, so to speak. Your liability insurance is required in Mexico. Your foreign issued, your U.S. Canadian policy is allowed in Mexico as long as you're Part 91, as long as you're not a charter or commercial flight. Territory coverage must specifically show Mexico. The liability coverage needs to be over 300,000 US, and it needs to be in effect the entire time the aircraft is in Mexico. And they'll want to see it once you land. Okay. If you don't have it, or if you have any doubts, on our member website, we have a link to a company in the US that will get you. We have no commercial interest. We don't make a penny off of this. We do this as a courtesy, so that if you want to just feel better, that you're not going to have any issues, there's a link there. And the great thing about this service is you can get it for a week, a month, a year. That way, you don't have to buy the whole year if you don't want to. But I would urge you to give yourself some time, to get a flat tire, dead battery, whatever. You don't want it to expire the day of your return. APIS. Mexico's had an APIS now for about 10 years. And we were able to secure a process that was really simple, where you filled out this really basic Excel spreadsheet and sent it in. If this is what you used to do, unfortunately, this has been eliminated. Okay, so if this is what you are familiar with, unfortunately, that's no longer accepted. We must submit this bad boy, and it's the Air Inc. from Rockwell Collins. The XL version 1.2C is in Charlie, and it's got to be transmitted through AirInc or through a third party like us that has a contract with AirInc. Now, this Excel spreadsheet, unlike the one before, they've got very specific formats in terms of if it's caps, lowercase, the date format, the time format. It's very, very, very sensitive. So make sure that you comply. If you don't want to send it to AirInc, if you don't want to spend a few $1,000s for that contract, or you don't want to pay a third party to do it, you can send it for a maximum of 4 times during a year to this email. The downside is that email address is just an email forwarder. So if that Excel bombs, it gets rejected for a format error or whatever, you'll never see that reply. So this one, you can do it. The downside is it's only a one-way thing. So you really don't know if it was received properly and if it was uploaded properly, but it's out there so you can avoid. So if you're very comfortable and confident with what you're doing, there's an alternative that won't cost you a cent. By reg, it's 30 minutes prior, but we've been told by AirInc, who runs this thing, that it's 24. Take your pick. Private, commercial, you may need to send that email to Mexican immigration at the airport. So check with the airport, check with the FBO to see if the local folks are going to want you to send that email to them as well, that Excel spreadsheet. On January 1st of this year, there was a huge change to the entry process. The old single multiple entry permits went away. Those had been around for a long time. They were replaced with what's called the single entry authorization, which is the biggest misnomer because it's not a single entry. But anyway, that's what it's called, or an AIU, Autorización de Internación Única in Spanish. Approvals before each international airport could generate their own entry authorization. Now they are controlled out of Mexico City. So they have to obtain the authorization number from them. It is valid for 180 days. And it works like the old multiple entry permit, except that it's for 180 days. So it's like taking the old single and multiple and put it together. The one good thing about this one versus the past is if you enter in September, well, it's good for 180 days. Before, the multiple expired on December 31st, and that tripped up a lot of people who decided to spend New Year's in Mexico. So that's one good thing about this one, is the 180-day clock starts from the minute it's issued. All of the documents you had to present before are still required: airworthiness registration, insurance, airman certificates, medical certificates. But they now want a LOPA, layout of passenger accommodations. Don't ask me why. I can't answer that one, but what we have been doing and recommending is, out of your weight and balance section of your AFM, just send the cabin configuration. Now, bear in mind, if your aircraft can have multiple configurations, make sure you send the one that matches the way your aircraft is configured. Why it's a big deal, again, I can't tell you. I just know that this is a hot button for them. And they may also want to see pictures of the interior of the aircraft, and possibly even the outside where they can see the tail number. Actually, what's happening, and again, we do this all day, every day, we're seeing procedures vary between, even within the same airport, between who's on duty and within the AFAC office of a particular airport and between airports. What are those variations? Well, fortunately, the time to process one's getting shorter. But some of them are issued with a list of the approved crew, others are not. The ones that are not are saying, oh, well, we can see it in the system. Not sure what system they're referring to. If you change the crew, some airports will force you to get a whole new entry authorization, pay one. Other airports will modify the crew for a nominal fee, okay? Again, if you're looking for clarity, this is not the place to look, but this is exactly what we're dealing with right now. Some airports are taking a very strict interpretation. They're saying the AIU becomes a mandatory aircraft document and should always be on board the document. And if it isn't, I've not seen any fines or heard of any fines actually issued, but we've heard of threats of fines issued because they consider it now just like an airworthiness certificate. Again, I'm just a messenger. but fortunately that is seen. Another thing that we're seeing that has tripped some people up is if your aircraft, if you have a lease agreement with a charter operator and you are, your aircraft is on somebody's AOC, the FAA publishes, there's a page on the FAA website where you can download a list of all the tail numbers associated with charter companies. And if your tail number is on that list, then as far as Mexico is concerned, that aircraft is always chartered, okay? So if you fall in that category, make sure you check. Sometimes they'll check the list when you land. Sometimes they don't. But there's just a tip here to do so. They are accessing that list and they are assuming that if it's chartered. What do you do? Ever wonder why palm trees survive hurricanes? Because they're flexible. So whichever way the wind is blowing on that particular day at that particular airport, just go with the flow. If they want you to process a new one, process the new one. Because if you try to dig your heels in, you're going to be just like anything that's written in a hurricane, you're going to get chopped off at the knee. So just be flexible and all will be good. At the end of the day, it will be fine. Family and friends are allowed on private flights. However, some airports, they may get all sticky, like, well, if they didn't come in on the airplane, well, then they can't be on the airplane. Typically it all gets worked out with the authorities to explain who they are, what their relationship is, but that could come up. Customs, if you are a pilot, long story here, they really have a hard time differentiating between an owner pilot, recreational pilot, and a professional pilot. So if you're a pro pilot, the customs people are not going to let you come in with tennis rackets, golf clubs, snorkeling equipment, blah, blah, blah. They expect you to look just like an airline pilot and you're just working. So if you fall in that category, you may want to get somebody else to bring your stuff in for you that's on that aircraft. Just a tip. And unless you have a burning desire to find out more about the Mexican legal system and what the inside of a Mexican jail looks like, you do not, under any circumstances, want to bring firearms, ammunition, or weapons, knives, those martial arts things, unless you have secured the proper authorizations from the Mexican authorities. So if you're going hunting in Mexico, white dove or whatever, just make sure that you have secured the proper permits for those weapons. And very importantly, that 4457 from CBP, because when you return, you're looking at a firearm importation. So ATF rules kick in, CBP. The easiest form to deal with all of that is the 4457 before you leave the US. No controlled substances. You don't want to go there. Visa requirements, we talked about at the beginning. When you arrive, you need to land at an AOE. You need to have submitted that Mexican APIS that we talked about a few minutes ago. You will have had to file an ICAO flight plan from where you departed, the US, or if you're coming back from Central America. And when you cross the Mexican border, IFR, it's automatic. VFR, you are expected to report with the closest tower, approach, or center. That's a regulatory requirement. Say, hey, I'm here, this is who I am, this is where I'm going, my altitude, and that's the way it works. And there are a number of frequencies along the US-Mexico border, depending which way you're going, whether you need to close your flight plan with LATOS, or you need to get a squawk code from flight service, or if you're crossing into Mexico, et cetera, et cetera. There are a lot of frequencies. This little map is also available on our website. Once you land, don't forget the flight plan needs to be closed. In Mexico, the good news is the tower does it for you, even VFR. Because you had already talked to LATOS when you got to the border. I know it sounds confusing, but that's just the way it is. So if you're coming from the US, you should contact flight service at the border, let them come in. But when you contact the Mexican Tower Approacher Center, they will basically, in their system, create a VFR flight plan for you so that you can continue on into Mexico. And they'll close it when you land. So just letting LATOS know you're at the border is what you need to do. When you land, don't be surprised. You're going to get soldiers who are going to show up and they're going to start asking questions and stuff. We have a little worksheet on our website with the typical questions that's translated, so you know, and then you can just fill out the information and hand it to them, and hopefully you've got all the answers that they're looking for on that form. Otherwise, you know, there are apps now on iPhones and smartphones that you can translate. You may be required to present an in-word general declaration. You may have to do an immigration. These are pretty much gone. There may be an airport out there that doesn't get many international flights that might still ask for this, but I'll put it out there because that's what it used to be. But most of these have gone. Similarly, customs declaration forms, you know, depending upon the airport, they may ask you to do one, they may not. It's more likely that you may be asked to do a cash declaration form. Again, it's not illegal to transport more than 10,000. It's illegal not to declare. Arrival into Mexico, you must obtain an arrival report. That'll be granted to you when you land. You got to get that still authorization that we just talked about. And remember, that authorization comes with a receipt. It's only valid when it's accompanied. So make sure you don't lose it. Keep the whole thing and keep it on the aircraft. Make your life simple. The aircraft can only stay for 180 days. That's the life of the permit. So, you know, don't leave it to day 179. You know, it's all that's going to be the day your battery's dead, your tire is flat, your starter gives up the ghost. Don't push it. There are fees, as in everything in life. Federal, state, private airports, they all have their different fees. Usually there's the entry permit fee, which is about $100 roughly for that AIU. Immigration has fees in and out. Those are roughly around $40 per person. Most of the other fees are based on max takeoff weight. So there will be a landing, a ramp, parking. And if you're going to use an FBO, just get a quote up front so you don't, you know, get a surprise. Some of them have very great service and very, very attractive prices. Others, their pricing may be a little bit more than you were planning on. Pay your fees before you depart when you're flying within Mexico. Expect that they're going to want you to do an ICAO flight plan, even for VFR, for flights within there. When you go to get your flight plan approved, they may want to see your entry permit. And when you land at the destination, proceed to the general aviation ramp. And again, you may get met again by military. It's time to go. You've got to depart Mexican AOE. You've got to file your Mexican APIS. You got to surrender if you were given one, that mission form, probably not. You may present an outward general declaration. If you're going on to Central America, I urge you to do that because they will want to see it when you land at the airport in Central America. And again, you may also be asked to complete a cash declaration form and pay whatever fees. There's always fees, but in Mexico, they're on the more accessible side relative to other countries. And then you will be required to file an ICAO flight plan form, where regardless if you're VFR or IFR, everything is done through an ICAO flight plan form. Now, we have a great relationship with Mexican ATC, with their director general and his staff. And I asked them, what are the typical mistakes that US pilots, Canadian pilots make when they come into Mexico that gets them into trouble? Number one, violating special use airspace, okay? Along with not following the VFR procedures for the airport they're going to or transitioning through, and failing to know the dimensions of the terminal control area. And they do publish these charts. Unfortunately, these are a little bit harder to get to, especially if you are VFR and you don't have a Jeppesen trip kit. And even some of these are not in the Jeppesen trip kit. But they do publish these in the Mexican AIP. So the only place you can get it is from someone who has a Mexican AIP. Either yourself, you could Google Mexico AIP, look at the fees, decide if if that's for you. Our member website, we have them all there. The VFR and the terminal control. Grecia yesterday confirmed that they are all up to date. Thank you, Grecia. So that's the number one error. The second, flying VFR at night. In Mexico, pretty much outside the US, there's no night VFR. That's another big no-no. Don't leave the US at night VFR and cross into Mexican airspace and think that things are going to go well. They won't. Avoid slang. It's already, the accents are bad enough, but don't start saying Bonanza Sky. No, you're November 123 Alpha Bravo. Don't use Fish Finder in the all that stuff. It makes us look bad, and they are not going to have a clue what you're talking about. Be prepared to give position reports in radial and DME. A lot of people just don't remember how to do that anymore with all the GPSs and the equipment that we have today. Mexico is still very, very much VOR, DME, radial, and DME from the station. Okay, radial from. Please be prepared to do that. And failing to get notices to air missions. That's another big one. Some of these restricted airspaces go hot and people get into trouble. You have this on the CST website for those that are so inclined. We'd love to have you as a member. In the gory details, you're going to Chihuahua International, unless you're using a handler at this airport, don't go international. Make your international entry somewhere and international departure somewhere else, and then fly to Chihuahua under as a domestic flight. Okay. If you want the gory details, contact us. But bottom line, do not fly to Chihuahua International. Some tips: be careful with third-party apps. I'm going to be putting some posts out there on our website and others. We've seen some nuances here. I know we're running out of time, so I can't get into the details. Never turn your back on a working fuel truck. If you need PRIS for fuel, bring it. Always communicate using your tail number, not the Bonanza Skyline. No night VFR. If you ever have doubt what the controller is saying, always ask them to repeat. Don't assume. Make sure you're clear. Be familiar with airspace. The common traffic near the border is 122.8, but per reg, it's 122.5. Use airports that are operating, have a current permit. Left-hand traffic patterns prevail. Speed restrictions, if you're flying a turboprop, turbojet, they'll be on the JEP charts, but make sure you know what they are. ARCs. DME ARCs are alive and well in Mexico. STARS, SIDS, approaches, they're out there. So if it's been a while, make sure you know how your navigation equipment can do those. And if your IFR, as I said, make your first trip IFR to make your life easier. Higher altitudes, cooler, better communications, better gliding distance. If you're having trouble communicating, ask, transmit on the blind if another aircraft can help you relay information. And again, always clarify. If you're flying to a non-towered airport, I'm going to tell you from experience, always make an overflight of the runway. Make sure it's clear of any obstacles, kids, goalposts, soccer balls, goats, whatever. Don't depend on ATC for weather. That's not, I don't say that negatively. They don't have weather radar like ATC in the US. So it's not meant as a derogatory. They just don't, they can't see it. They may give you a vector right into a severe thunderstorm. They're not being mean. They just can't see it. Convert liters to gallons, temperatures in oil. If you're going to be in a hot area, I've seen, some of the like Cirruses that have the oil pressure alarm, it starts sounding when the viscosity gets low, things like that. Mexican immigration may charge $100 fee. Long story there. I would say just be prepared to pay it. If they don't want it, good, or don't go on a weekend. Flights during peak times, they may have restrictions. Cancun, notorious. Puerto Vallarta, there's a number of the popular destinations. And again, if you're flying from Central America to Mexico, Cozumel, Tapachula, yes, I've said it multiple times. It's something you don't want to do. Some resources real quick. We have our cstflightservices.com website. A lot of stuff there. The apps are there. The Cuban Overfly, the Mexican airspace, the online services, that are all there. We have little short videos now that our marketing team has put up. So if you're wondering how they work and you don't want to, just click the video. It'll show you, boom, boom, boom. It'll take you through what happens if you want to use the app. The member website's got all of that stuff. It's got those VFR charts, terminal control area. $70 a year, in aviation, that's a rounding error. So we try to get the information, and that's just to cover our cost to keep the website up and running, the member website. If you have a group, you want to do a trip, we do those. We do those virtually. We'll plan it for you, but you guys fly it, and we'll do the ground handling, or somebody from our company can go with you. We've uploaded a lot of different topics in Spanish and English to our social media platforms. Take advantage of it. They're free, and we cover a lot of different international related topics that